This is Musical Talk.
Musical Talk.
The UK's independent musical theatre podcast.
Musical Talk. The UK independent musical theatre podcast.
Hello, welcome to this week's episode of Musical Talk. Once again, I am joined by Professor Robert Gordon from Goldsmiths University. Hello, Robert.
Hello, Nick.
I'm back from America, and we saw, we saw Gypsy last time we talked, didn't we?
Oh yes, that wonderful production of Gypsy.
Classic Broadway musical, and we have just been to see a brand new British musical called Made in Dagenham, which is playing at the Adelphi Theatre. Well, but this is your second time seeing it. It's my first time. My first question for you is, what has changed since you last saw the production? Has it been drastically different for you?
Yes, I saw it at a preview, and I was expecting things to change because I saw it a week before it opened. I think it's tightened up. The second act seems to move faster, and I think that was necessary. I don't think it's changed radically, though, because most of the thing, I think all the numbers are as they were, and the scenes are in exactly the same order. I think that the night I saw it, the wonderful Sophie Louise Dan was singing her song in different registers, and she's having to go from chest to head register very quickly. And I think they've reorganised that a bit, so she talks a little bit more of it, but she still hits some very big notes, and she's marvellous.
But not much probably needed to change, because it's a very, very, very good show, isn't it, Robert?
Yes, I think it derives its strength from the intelligence of the book, of the film, the screenplay for the film, which was directed by Nigel Cole. It was an intelligent little film, and what they've done is they've expanded it in a way which is very sympathetic to the film. They don't change that much in essence, but the addition of music makes it much more celebratory and epic, anthemic in a way, because at times the women are singing these songs in praise of women's rights, really, and equal pay for women, but which the audience almost, I felt the audience was starting to clap at the end, along with the most anthemic song, where the central character Rita does a speech at the TUC conference, in which that she wins over the TUC members to agree to insisting on equal pay for women, and the audience does start to clap along with the song, and that's really rather interesting.
We should probably say what it's about. It's set in the 60s in Dagenham in Essex, in a factory where both women and men work building cars for Ford, don't they? So the women are the sewers and the men are the mechanical put together people. Yes,
well, the women are making the car seats, and so the women are doing stitching, and they're working on sewing machines, and the women are classified as B-grade workers, and they've been demoted from being C-grade workers, which is more skilled, to B-grade workers, which is unskilled, and quite rightly they protest against that. But the protest then leads them to realise that even if they were given back their C-grade, which is what they deserve, they would still be earning only a small percentage of what the men are earning for the same, at the same grade, and that then
escalates.
It escalates, and it makes them demand equal pay for women. So, in a way, it's a very timely musical, as you yourself have said to me. In some cases, in business, women still do not earn as much as men. Although, of course, there are laws about equal pay for equal work.
So how does it see in business without really working, isn't it?
Well, I know that's a bit cynical, Nick. I think they are all working, but. I thought the show, I must say, I really think it's a tremendous show. I think it's
quoted as the best since Matilda, haven't you, Robert?
Well, I think it's probably the only British musical to open since Matilda, but it is certainly for me the best British musical.
Simon Cowell would disagree with you.
Well, I think it's the best British musical since Matilda, and I think there's echoes of Billy Elliot in it, and I think that what's very important about it is this is a show about British social history and about British politics and British culture, and we see so many half-hearted, I think, American shows, I have to say, like Dirty Rotten Scoundrels, which are formulaic, which are fun, but they're formulaic. They're not about our culture. This show is very funny, lots of very good jokes, courtesy of Richard Bean, but it is British, and it is about British culture. And I have noticed both times I've been there that the audience is made up of quite a large proportion of what one might call still working class people. Certainly they're not the sort of so-called cultured upper middle class people who usually go to theatre in serious theatre in the trendier venues. But that seems to me to be a very good thing, because these people identify with this show and cheer along.
I said, as we left Act 1, if Matilda and Billy Elliot had got very drunk one night and had a child, it would have been literally made in Dagenham.
Yes, I think it's got some of the sort of naughtiness and quirkiness and wit of Matilda, with a lot of the passion and political fervour of Billy Elliot.
A couple of moments in the musical weren't wrapped up for me. For example, the bit about the child getting caned. The mother, Rita, beautifully played by Gemma Arterton, but we'll talk more about that in a bit. That was never wrapped up, and another thing was never wrapped up was one you brought up, Robert.
Yes, I think there's a wicked sort of spoof of a nasty
Is that
American,
really?
an unpleasant American.
Not a wicked spoof,
No, not a wicked spoof,
cruel spoof.
But well, it is wicked in the true sense of the word. A
Gun-toting.
dislikable American.
Yes.
And he's the from Ford factory in America, and comes over and tries to put the Brits in their place, and he sings a very funny song. Now that's rather marvellous in a way, and it's a sort of parody.
It's like the anti-American dream from...
Absolutely, and it's a country and western style song. But that character never really goes anywhere. He becomes a kind of stock villain, but then he disappears after a few scenes, and you never really feel there's been a resolution of the conflict between the American managers and owners of Ford and the workers. It sort of dissolves into something else at the TUC.
You wonder if that part was put in for the musical, or whether it's part of the true story, because we haven't actually said this is a true story, have we, Robert?
Yes, it is based on a true story, of course, of the women who went on strike. And if you look at some of the publicity in the newspapers, you'll see Gemma Arterton has posed quite a lot with the original women who went on strike in the 60s at the Dagenham Ford factory. But that is a fanciful, yes, I'm sure it's fanciful, although they may well have sent Americans over to try and quell the strike. It's obviously a sort of fantasy. And it is very funny, and it's quite crude, but I think it's a good time for a bit of American bashing at the moment in musical theatre, because we get bashed enough in Hollywood. Brits are always the villains in Hollywood films.
We're always the villains, and it's about time we had an American villain.
Yeah, so now we've got an American villain, and with the best, most sort of affectionate feelings in the world towards Americans.
I just returned from there. So.
Many of my best friends are Americans, including my sister. It does seem to me that as a sort of cultural assertion of Britishness, I think the show defines itself in some ways, or the people in this show define themselves against the American, because it's about British values, not American values.
What I liked about this show was that it also displays the two levels of Britishness. We had the very kind of bowler hats and parliament level of British upper crustness, and we also had the true Essex working class Britain as well.
Yes, I think it's very good in its observations of class. It's funny, it's exaggerated, but it's good. I also think there's a brilliant send-up, beautiful portrayal by Sophie Louise-Dan, as I've said, of Barbara Castle. But I think it's not only very well sung at times, but she gets... in very obvious way, but she gets the stereotypical mannerisms that people who are old enough will remember of Barbara Castle on television, and she's really very funny as Barbara Castle, and the writing of the Barbara Castle role is very, very funny. And of course it's very important, because there was Barbara Castle at a time when women were very much secondary in politics, and yet she was a major leading figure within the Labour Party government.
And we also had a stand-up comedy portrayal of a Prime Minister as well.
Yes, I mean, some people that I've spoken to haven't liked the caricature of Harold Wilson. I think it's very funny, and I don't mind that it's really ridiculous and theatricalised.
It's like a Ronnie Barker character, really, isn't it?
Yes, it
reminds me of Arkwright when he came on with his beige jacket.
It's a Ronnie Barker skit, but I don't think that part of the play is intended to be a serious depiction of history in any way. It's a joking, cartoon-like, spitting image view of Barbara Castle and Harold Wilson.
The music is by David Arnold, and Richard Thomas has done the lyrics, though I sort of wish Richard Thomas had done the music as well. The music's very serviceable, it's a bit pastiche at times, very rocky.
I liked the music. I thought it's not the greatest show music I've ever heard, but I thought the pastiche of 60s and going towards early 70s, late 60s rock and roll, rock and sort of rock and roll type music was was very good. There are some numbers which I think are very good. I think the lyrics are most of the time quite brilliant. And
Some
I think
dodgy scans here and there, though. I imagine.
well, you're a writer, so you would notice that. But I felt they were very, very idiomatic. They're perfectly in character most of the time, and they're very funny.
Yes. What would you change about the show, Robert, if you had the blessing to do that?
I think the first act works pretty well. You made an interesting comment to me in the foyer at the interval that the first opening number should lead straight into the second opening number because it's a bit of a false start. But what I think, I didn't think that was too bad. The show recovered easily from that little blip. But I thought that I think that in the second half, after the interval, there's this marvellous introduction of the villain, the American villain figure. And
Played by Steve First, who was in Matilda as well as the father.
Played by Steve First, and he's very funny. But I think that that song never really goes anywhere. After that song, that character doesn't go anywhere and sort of disappears from the action to a certain extent. And you want to know, I think, to some extent, what actually happened. But instead, you're given scenes at the Trade Union Congress and no information about even whether the what happened at the Ford factory, or whether the American went back home, or any of the people involved
shot
at the
himself
factory.
with that gun he had.
Yeah, or any of the people in the factory were fired, because it seemed likely that they might be, given the villainy that we were watching on stage. But what I have to say against that, it's quite shrewd, because although that scene is a bit of a non sequitur, what you see in the second half, and it's brilliantly conveyed by Gemma Arterton, is the central character of Rita growing as a woman and as an intelligent political spokesperson, and you see her partly in Barbara Castle's office with her co-workers, and then...
I'm thinking to say Barbara Cartland.
Barbara Castle.
Which would be even funny.
No, it wouldn't. You're too young to remember Barbara Castle. For those of us older than you, Nick, Barbara Castle was very funny in a certain kind of way. But there's a lovely little scene which is showing the solidarity of the women with Barbara Castle in some ways, and yet they disagree with her about strategy. And then you watch, I think, as Rita struggles but develops more and more political sophistication, and is then able to go to the TUC and make this huge speech. And I think the other thing that I noticed tonight, as opposed to the first time, was the husband character doesn't have very much development in the second half, and he changes very quickly and suddenly begins to appreciate his wife's struggle.
He suddenly disappears.
Yes, that's a bit pat. But, you can't do everything in a musical. You can't have the full-scale resonance of a very carefully thought-out play, though there are times when this does.
The husband is wonderfully played by Adrian Gregorian, who's he has a very good song in that too. I thought that was very moving.
Yes, he has a beautiful voice, and he gives a lovely performance. What we should talk a little bit about Richard Bean, because he's very much in the news as a playwright with Great Britain in the West End, and now with this show.
And also One Man, Two Governors as well as his other big hit.
One Man, Two Governors, I don't think it's playing at the moment, but it has been playing around the country recently. I thought it was a very clever book, and it's very funny, and he's got great facility at writing jokes. Some people think that the piece is too jokey. I don't know what you thought, Nick.
It needs the jokes to lift you. It's almost like if you were in this doldrum of a situation, as these characters, you would joke about it.
Yes.
Because that's what you do. And
yes.
you don't want to have a musical with quite it's not a depressing subject matter, but at times it's a bit down in the dumps. You want a joke to lift you up.
It could be very grey. It could be a very dark show all the way through. But I think what gives the jokes point for me is they're very much in character. So although sometimes they seem arbitrary in terms of the action, they're always in character.
And there's some very good jokes as well.
Yes, there are some very good jokes. I think that also the first half is much more jokey than the second half, and I think that's appropriate because, as you said, you needed it to feel jolly in the first half in order to accept the rather anthemic and rousing political ending.
I want to talk about the design as well, because it's a spectacular looking show. The set is kind of made up of this kind of the model packs that you would get in magazines, that you would push these things out and form models of cars and stuff like that. And it's a big show, Robert.
And as it's set in a car factory, that's so appropriate. You
Yes.
see cars, but they look like plastic model cars. I think it's a beautiful motif, very clever as a design, and I think then the rest of the scenes follow naturally in that kind of environment. And I think that the changes of scene were very well handled from one scene to the next.
And you have cars that come on stage, and at one point, dodgems or bumper cars. And
it's very 60s in terms of the pop cultural icons that you see on
It's set in
stage.
the 60s.
Yes, but the design, echoes that very well.
And there's also another very funny moment in Act 2 where it all goes wrong during the car display, which it was very, very entertaining. Was that Act 2 or Act 1?
Act 2.
Yes, and that was it had those moments where the opening of Act 1 was very funny, that moment in Act 2 was very funny, but as you say, Act 1 was more gag-heavy, and this one was more,
The jokes in the second half are more situational and less like gags. Can I say something about it? Because I feel that actually it hasn't been well enough reviewed by the critics. I was disappointed to see the 2-star review.
Read the reviews.
Well, I was disappointed to see the 2-star review by a critic who I respect greatly, Michael Billington, because I think some of the critics have tried to take it too seriously. And this is, after all, a great entertainment. It does have political implications, and it is very much about British social history. But for God's sake, it is a musical, and it is meant to be fun, and it is great fun, and the audience, at both times that I saw it, were really warm and enthusiastic at the end, and actually all the way through the show.
Do you think it hangs too heavily upon the shoulders of Billy Elliot, though?
No, I don't think. I think the one thing that distinguishes it totally from Billy Elliot and makes it in some ways a very brave choice, there's no obvious show business content. In Billy Elliot, you have the boy who wants to dance, and you have the little girl's dancing school. So there's a lot of show business built into the story. Here, there's none of that. We actually are we're looking at life in Essex, which isn't particularly entertaining. Normally, I wouldn't have thought. This piece is faithful to that. It doesn't break. I mean, what it gives you is sort of 60s styles and 60s fashions and a wonderful parody of the dolly birds who are selling the car in the 60s. But it sort of sometimes sort of shades of Hairspray. But it's not set in anything like a kind of theatrical or dance studio environment. And so, therefore, it actually has to stand on its own. The songs have to just be songs that are the character's thoughts. The songs have to be coming from the character's heart. And I thought actually they did very well, because most of the time you just accepted the songs when they came, even though they weren't particularly motivated by any kind of show business environment.
Apart from one moment where she gives her final speech, the character of Rita, and it's kind of half spoken and then there's a song.
Yes, I'm not sure that's totally well judged. It probably would have been better if there was some musical underscore when she began her speech, and then that had built into a song, or otherwise let her do the whole speech and then let the anthemic part come afterwards.
I also don't think it'll land in America at all, this piece, purely because of the anti-American, pro-American song that we have in its ironical sense, but also because of the lack of show business.
It seems, for an American, I think it would seem to be a very socialistic show, though I don't think that's its intention. It's too overtly political about with its bold and funny assertion of feminism. And yes, in a way, it would seem anti-American to Americans. I don't think any British audience would see it as anti-American, because the stereotype of the American that we're given in the show is one that we all feel we know.
Yes. And you took some students of yours to see it as well. What was their reaction?
My students had an odd reaction, actually. They're not British, so they're European students, and they actually found it a little bit patronising towards the working class, which I didn't really understand. And they also thought it was too joke-heavy, and that the jokes undermined the seriousness of the show's theme.
But you had a Canadian student, you said.
Yes, well, the Canadian is an older man, and he also felt it was patronising to the working class. But that, I don't think that...
Patronising.
Yes, that exactly, an American. But that wouldn't, I think, strike any British audience.
Well, it's playing at the Adelphi Theatre, and you can certainly go and check it out. We urge you to. It's a very, very good British musical, and thank you very much, Robert, for talking to me about it and joining me.
Thank you, Nick.